Hey everyone, this is Grant. What you just heard was the exact same drum sequence being played back on each of the 3 Korg Volca Drum synths, plus the Volca sample. I've got 3 more sequences that I'm going to do this with, coming from my handy 1987 drum machine patterns book. But while I'm setting up the second sequence, I'll talk a little bit more about this video. Now that the Volca drum is out, there are 4 different options to choose from if you want to get a Volca and you want to use it for drums. For someone who's not already familiar with these machines, it can be confusing what exactly the differences between them are, and they are very different machines. I don't want to go too in-depth on the features of each one in this video. I want to keep it short. So I'm mostly just going to focus on how differently they sound from each other. So I'm going to go through each pattern once, just playing it and pressing nothing other than the play button. Then I'm going to go through it again a second time using some of the performance features and the controls of each synth that are unique to that machine. For this first pattern that I already played, which I think was in here as an R&B pattern, I used the stutter effect on the beats. I only used it on the closed hi-hat. You can use that on any instrument or you can use it globally. And that sort of sounds like a delay, but rather than being a delay effect on the output audio, it is re-triggering those drum hits every time. On the sample, I was playing with the isolators. I turned them both down to give kind of a bandpass filter effect, kind of like you might do in a DJ set. On the kick, I used the sustain key on the Touch FX, which kind of gives you that sustained 808 style. And then on the drum, I messed with the decay setting on the waveguide, which gave you almost like a really short reverb. The next pattern is a little faster. I think it's labeled disco in this book. Alright, that was our disco pattern. So on the beats on the second time through there, what I was doing is I had my hands on both of the decay knobs for both the closed hi-hat and the open hi-hat. And the reason I was doing that is because the beats is the only one of these 4 machines where you can tweak multiple layers at the same time just by, knob per function, grabbing onto them. With the sample or the drum, you would have to select that part individually and then use the control panel from there. On the sample, I chose to use the swing knob because it's global. It affects everything that's happening, not just the part that you have selected on the sample. And I made it into more of a swingy pattern. On the kick, I used that Touch FX feature again, which is great for adding some performance flourishes as you're playing. And I used a roll effect there. On the drum, I switched kits in the middle of playing. And one cool thing you can do there is keep the program running between multiple patterns, but then switch out the kit. By the way, on most of these, I'm using a Volca drum kit that I made. I don't profess to be an expert at the Volca drum at all. I'm sure there are people who can make it sound way better. But I wanted to do something simple just to give you an idea of how this machine sounds. The kit that I switched to that sounded maybe a little chiptune is one of the default kits that comes with it. For the next pattern, we're going to take the tempo way down and do kind of a dub style thing. So that was kind of trippy, right? On the beats, I used the global stutter this time. So remember on that first pattern, I had stutter only affecting the closed hi-hat, or it was retriggering that. This time it's retriggering all of the instruments to play over and over again. It sounds kind of like a really aggressive delay, and I think it's a really cool sounding effect for kind of dubbed out patterns like this one. On the sample, I took advantage of its ability to have a whole lot of parts playing at once, and those samples don't have to be drums. They can be anything you want. By the way, for this video, I did reset the Volca sample to its factory samples. On the kick, I used that Touch FX strip again, and this time I messed around with the octave up in addition to just the rolls. On the Volca drum, I switched the model of the waveguide over to a string model in the middle of that performance, and that's what gave you that trippier delay reverb style effect instead of the more subtle other model that was playing before. And here's the last pattern. On the beats this time, I used the active step feature to do a little bit of a roll. And the active step is actually on all four of these machines, not just the beats. On the sample, what I was doing there is showing off that it's the only Korg Volca that has a song mode. You can have each of your 6 song slots repeat as many patterns as you want. What I had that time is kind of an A, B, A, and then a fill pattern. So by having my hands off of it, I was able to go through a progression of different patterns, and I only had to use 3 memory slots because that song mode lets you repeat patterns and it lets you do it in any order you want. On the Volca kick, I was messing around with the decay, the bend, and the time knobs. And this one really does allow you to do a lot of performance tweaking while you're playing. This was the first time in this video that I even touched anything that was above just the Touch FX strip on the bottom. So even though it's only a mono synth, and you can only make one sound come out of it at a time, you have a ton of knob per function options to just grab a knob and start messing with it while you're performing. On the Volca drum, I messed with the modulation on one of the parts that was playing. And I mentioned earlier that on the Volca drum, at least as far as I can tell, you can only use the knobs on the top of the machine to mess with whichever part you've selected. But you can go a lot more in depth, like I was here, than you can on the Volca beats. So that's all 4 patterns. I hope this gives you an idea of what each of these 4 machines sounds like compared directly to each other. And of course, while I've got everything hooked up, I had to see what would happen if I just played all patterns at the same time. So it sounds interesting. I'll show you that. But if you like this video, please subscribe. And I'm sure you thought of some questions while you were watching it, so don't hesitate to leave those in the comments. Thanks.